In this video, we'll be talking about better ways to write code in computer programming. One thing that can be tricky to use is something called a switch case statement. It can make code hard to read, scale, and maintain. So, we'll explore some other options that might work better. But, don't worry. Switch case statements can still be useful in some cases, especially when you don't have too many options to choose from. We'll show you how to decide which approach is best for your specific project. Let's dive in. Let's create some functions that can be used in different scenarios. Hey, so in this code we have a few different functions that are related to making payments. Each one is for a different payment method, like UPI, credit card, debit card, wallet, and PayPal. Each function takes in two parameters, the amount of money being paid, and any processing fees that might apply. They then return a promise object. Promises are a way to handle asynchronous code in JavaScript. They allow us to make a request and then promise to do something when that request is finished, whether it was successful or not. So, in these payment functions, we might do something like make an API call to a payment gateway, and then resolve or reject the promise based on the result of that call. Finally, we use the export keyword to make these functions available to other parts of our code. That way, we can use them to make payments in different parts of our application. Next, write some code to demonstrate how to call these functions using switch case statements. Hey, so this is some more code related to the payment functions we were talking about earlier. In this code, we have a function called getPaymentSuccessful which takes in two parameters, the payment method, like UPI or PayPal, and the amount of money being paid. The function uses a switch case statement to determine which payment method function to call based on the input. So, for example, if the payment method is credit card, it will call the credit card payment method function and pass in the amount and a processing fee of 0.02. If the input payment method is not one of the expected values, like net banking for example, it will return a rejected promise with an error message saying that the payment method is invalid. Finally, we have some code at the end that sets the payment method to PayPal and the amount to 100, and then calls the getPaymentSuccessful function with those values. So essentially, this code is a way to handle different payment methods and process payments accordingly. This code's time complexity will increase as we add more functions or methods to it. One solution to this is to use the strategy pattern, which separates the algorithm from the code that uses it. Instead of using a switch case statement to select the appropriate function, we can define a set of classes, each of which represents a specific algorithm or strategy. Here's an explanation of the strategy pattern in friendly language and an example of how it can be applied to the payment methods code. Certainly. This code block defines a new approach to handle payment methods that was mentioned in our previous discussions. Instead of using a switch case statement to determine which payment method function to call, this code uses an object called mapTestPaymentMethod to map payment method names to their corresponding function. The payment method functions are imported from a separate services module at the top of the code. The getPaymentSuccessful function takes in a payment method string and an amount value, and then checks if the payment method exists in the mapTestPaymentMethod object. If it does, it calls the corresponding function and passes the amount and processing fee values as arguments. If the payment method doesn't exist in the object, it returns a rejected promise with an error message saying the payment method is invalid. This approach is more efficient and scalable than using a switch case statement, as it can handle an unlimited number of payment methods by simply adding them to the object. Additionally, this approach improves the readability and maintainability of the code, making it easier for other developers to understand and modify it in the future.